So Ron, thank you so much for being here with us today at the Fourth Word School, talking about a place very near and dear to your heart, Virginia City. We would love to talk about Virginia City's history through the lens of your family and your own personal experiences. So with that in mind, I'd love to start with, tell us about your nickname, the Virginia City Relic.
Well, it was a spur-of-the-moment thing that stuck, and several years ago, we were doing the Slammer Museum up in the courthouse. After talking about it from the time I grew up that we should have a museum, and Pat Whitten said we have to put a museum in here when the Sheriff's Museum left. And it was a great group, and after we had gotten several months under our belt and were ready to open, they said, well, we need to put a little plaque in, just identifying who was on the committee. Mm-hmm. So we went around the table and everybody had a title. County manager, secretary to the county manager. Laura Mather was at that time director at Nora's job a few years ago. And they came to me. I'm retired. And I said, oh, Relic in residence. And laughed. And I said, we'll just put retired down. And a few weeks later, Laura said, you know, could we use that? Relic in residence? Yeah.
It's got a nice ring to it.
So that's how I've become Relic Ron, Relic in resident, VC Relic, whatever, but Relic. That all just a spur of the moment, and it's kind of fun. It's a nice name tag to have.
Yeah, a nice badge of honor. So your last name is Gallagher. I imagine you get lots of questions about the Gallagher family, but I'd like to, and we'll get to there, but first I'd like to ask about your maternal line, the Wilson family. What can you tell us about the Wilson family?
Thank you, because I have 3 daughters, and one of the things that has been an irritant since I had the 3 daughters, my wife and I had the 3 daughters, was that the mother's side of the house just gets forgotten. So Gallagher's, everyone knows Gallagher and Hugh Gallagher Elementary, but by comparison to the Wilson family, the Gallagher family are newcomers. The Wilsons came, as near as I can find out, records back in 1860, 61 are a little thin. The Wilsons came here early on. First child was born that we know of, 64, that survived, but there were a couple before that, and they're out in the cemetery. So the Wilsons, and they bought a house in about 1867. That house is still there. So the Wilsons are about as native as you can get. The Gallaghers, on the other hand, the first Gallagher came from Grass Valley in Nevada City in about 1871, 72. So I joke about the fact that Gallaghers get all the notoriety, but the Wilsons were here first. Makes my mother happy.
Yes, good.
She's smiling down.
And that's the important thing. We always have to keep mother happy.
Yes.
So you have family in the cemetery, going all the way back to probably some of the earliest residents of the cemetery, if you want to call them.
Well, actually, Candace Wheeler, who does a marvelous job out there were several cemeteries around here. And she believes that my great-grandfather, Thomas Wilson, who was buried out there in 72, he may well have been one of the bodies moved from either the Scorpion Cemetery, which is far north, and then we call it the Julia Bullet Cemetery. It's not that, but that he may well have been moved. Because there were those cemeteries, and when they finally said, gee, the Scorpion Cemetery was a great spot, except you couldn't get there for 6 months out of the year because of the weather.
Right.
So that's why you had, not to be maudlin, but bodies stacked around various buildings in Virginia City.
So there's truth to that, because you'll hear about, like on C Street, the back of the Washoe Club, for example, bodies stacked in the crypt.
They couldn't get them to the cemetery. And so somebody finally said, maybe we ought to move the cemetery in a little closer. And that's when they came up with the cemetery, as we refer to it, which is actually 11 separate cemeteries out there. And yes, so to make a long story longer, the Wilsons are buried right under the cross. They were some of the first ones, and then the Gallaghers and some more Wilsons farther down in the Catholic cemetery. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And what did the Wilsons do when they came here?
Well, you know, that's a very good question, because they didn't do anything famous that I've been able to find, except we believe that Thomas Wilson was able to buy a house early on in 66, 67. So he had to have a couple of bucks, which would mean he probably was not a laborer in the mines, that he was in somehow perhaps an engineer, whatever. And then he died and left my great-grandmother with 3 kids. My grandfather, George Wilson, who is the reason I still have property up here, because he was kind of an entrepreneur, teamster. And then the 3rd brother, Frank, he was a carpenter, and they just worked. And then Emmett, of course, became a temporary janitor here in about 1910, and spent the next 20 years here, and when he was still a janitor when he died in 1930. So.
Why do you say temporary janitor? It sounds like he was here a long time.
Well, he was temporary. Apparently, from what I can gather, they hired him either to fill in or to be temporary, and then whatever happened to the regular janitor in that 10-11 period, he became the full-time janitor. And if you look in the archives that we have now, which is a marvelous endeavor, you'll see all kinds of pictures of Emmett with the various classes, with his hat on, getting his picture taken. So
he was getting his picture taken with the classes.
Mm-hmm,
Oh,
mm-hmm.
How wonderful!
Up on the balcony,
Mm-hmm.
And he was still working when he died of. I found that this, if you do enough research, cirrhosis of the liver. I believe he may have had a few wee touches over the years. But anyway, he died. He was 65, which was not a bad run in that time frame. And yeah, and so he was here for 20 years.
Well, you must have a bit of psychic to you, because you sort of answered the next question I was going to ask, but perhaps maybe there's something else. My question was going to be, is there anything around the Fourth Ward School here that, when you come here, reminds you of your grandfather?
Well, just the fact that I know he was here,
Yeah.
and of course when I drive up on Stewart Street, which is the top street now, that's where he was born. The house is still there, and I don't know, Bruce Larson, delightful fellow, does botchicaloops if you ever want any glass work done. He bought the house that my mother was born in, and that's still up there.
How wonderful.
So I don't ever come into Virginia City and take a little tour around that I don't get flashbacks of Gallagher's and Wilsons.
That's wonderful. And I imagine those structures all survived the Great Fire, is that
yes,
correct?
the Wilson, it came close, but it didn't get up and came one street down below.
Wow.
So it was close, and that's what I say. I could picture my grandfather as a 10-year-old, probably with his mom packing some things, watching the fire rage across town, and wondering if it was going to get them.
Unfathomable to have to deal with something like that.
And of course, at that point in time, it was his mom and his 2 brothers. And they took in boarders, but yeah, to watch that and wonder what was going to happen. Yeah.
And fires were not only in 1875 here in town. They were. I read about one in 1950 that happened.
The Marie Building, right across from right where the post office is today.
Did you experience that? Were you in town when that happened?
I was only 9.
But your grandfather was only 10, right?
So
you probably remember.
We that time we lived on C Street. The house is still there, and I remember the fire units coming up from Dayton, coming up from Carson City, coming up from Reno, and wondering if more was going to burn. And that was a sad event, because the Marie building was a stunning building. It fronted out onto B Street, and then the post office was there, and Louis' Barber Shop, and a saloon or two. And of course now the post office takes up all of that. But that was a shame. But that was the Fire Fiend, and it was lucky that it was limited to that building. Yeah, the Marie building. And he was a very interesting man. If you're ever reading about history, he was an honest stockbroker. And in the mid-1870s, he made from $1,000 to $1,500 a day. Now, if you take that times 20, which is the difference in currency back then, he was making 20 or 30,000 bucks a day trading stocks here in Virginia City.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of money up here.
Wow. How would you compare and contrast both lines of your family tree, the Wilsons and the Gallaghers?
I would say that they both came from very common roots.
Mm-hmm.
The Wilsons being able to buy the house would indicate that there was some money there, but they were never rich. And then one brother became an entrepreneur and bought property and ran a grocery store and all of those things. The Gallaghers, on the other hand, came from Pennsylvania in the late 1850s, and went to Grass Valley, Nevada City to be miners. And as the mines began to peter out down there, my great-grandfather came up to Virginia City, and Neil Gallagher, and apparently met a lovely young lady named Maggie Doran, and he just worked in the mines, became a foreman, and actually were married by Father Minogue.
Hey, that's a cool claim.
Yeah, it's a see the signature on the marriage license. So then he died in a mine accident in 1880, and my grandfather stayed here with his mother, and his brother and sister went back to Grass Valley in Nevada City, and he was a hoisting engineer. I think when he died, my mother kept all the papers. He had all of $500 to his name. So to answer your question, they were fairly basic folks.
Do you know which mining accident he perished in?
Yes, he died in 1880 in a rather freak accident. He was working at the Yellow Jacket shaft, and he lived, it's where the railroad goes now, 89 Tunnel Toll Road. They had a little house there apparently, and he went to work in the morning and was getting ready to come up for lunch about 11 o'clock, and some material slipped off. They have more than one shaft, and so they were hauling equipment up in one, and it tipped, and it fell down the shaft where he and his partners were getting ready to come up from lunch. It fell so rapidly that they believed that they didn't even hear it coming, and he was decapitated.
Oh, I just got chills just imagining that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I always say I have DNA at the 3,000 foot level.
Wow. You've got to, as harrowing as history can be, you kind of have to learn to laugh at some of this stuff.
Well, you
otherwise
do.
You'll cry.
You do. And we go down to the Gold Hill Hotel today and go in the great room, and I say, well, this is where he had his last drink.
Probably so, yeah. You can always hoist a glass to him there. That's kind of cool. That's
always do.
Oh, you do?
Oh,
what a tradition. How cool is that?
Yeah. And then, as I say, the sirens went off, the whistles went off, and of course, my great-grandmother was 8.5 months pregnant, about to be confined, as they said.
Oh, yes, right.
That was the term, and she must have heard it, and as I say, and then he was, his family, his sister said that he was not going to be buried in this heathen area. So he was shipped back on the train.
Oh, wow.
He died on Friday, and on Monday, the Sarsfield Guard escorted him to the depot in Gold Hill, and he was then taken back and buried in Nevada City.
Oh, wow.
And my grandfather's older brother and sister, they went down and they grew up in Grass Valley in Nevada City, but he stayed here his whole life with his mother. So, and then family and whatever. So, yeah, pretty native.
Yes, which is why it's such a delight to talk to you, because you have your whole experience of your own personal life, but also being a historian, and you're clearly very interested in history. You can tell almost firsthand, at least secondhand, these great little windows into Virginia City's history.
I just wish I'd paid more attention growing up and had a camera.
Right, recording everything. Too bad they weren't pocket sized back then.
Yes,
right?
but and of course the stories that I've heard, and they were true old timers that were born in the 1870s and 80s that I grew up talking to at the grocery store. So I just wish I'd made more notes and appreciated it more.
Right.
Then.
Yeah, when you're a kid, you don't always appreciate maybe what some adult is yammering on about, right? But, looking back, is there any story that you do remember from those old timers? One that maybe comes to mind.
Well, yeah, I guess if you pick the old timer, and there were any number of them. The grocery store that I grew up in is where the hat store is today. And right next to that was the 62 bar. Yeah. And that's where so many of the old timers would hang out. And in the late 40s and early 50s, there was no mining going on for all practical purposes. So they would have to, and they still had to work. There was no social net back in those days like we have today. I would hear them tell stories about, well, the mines are going to come back. Just a matter of time. There's still gold down there, still silver down there. Speed Hesse, Charlie Addis. I mean, you could go down the list and you think, God, I should have gone in and sat out. I always remember talk about interesting habits. Just pop into my mind. Speed Hesse was a miner, born in the early 1900s, so he was a kid, I guess, compared to some of the others, but he would work in Reno. So he would walk down, his building is where the popcorn store is today. And Speed would walk down and he didn't drive, get a ride with Martin Rosso and go down and work in the construction in Reno. But for breakfast, he would have a beer and a raw egg broken in the beer. So he got a little alcohol, and he got a little protein.
Yeah, breakfast.
That was his breakfast. He would come home at night, and they would make him a sandwich. Mino and Piambo, they did great sandwiches. And he'd come back at night, go in, have a couple of shots and a beer. Go back up, back down the next day, do it all over. Yeah.
Well, it worked for him, right?
It worked for him. It was just fine. He was quite a character.
Very cool. You mentioned Charlie Addis. His name has come up in old copies of the 1950s Territorial Enterprise that I read as a paper boy.
Charlie Addis came from Pennsylvania. And that was, he was not native.
Okay.
But he grew up here, and I remember him because he always wore a tweed coat and lived out at the north end of town. And I guess was retired. I don't know what he lived on. He must have had a few dollars. He would come up in the morning and kind of work his way up and then go back home at night. Another character that, if you think about how good shape he must have been in, John Bowie was his name, and he was the caretaker at the hospital, the Art Center today. Lived in a basement. And he walked up to get his mail almost every day, and he was 75 or 80 years old.
Wow.
One tough son of a gun.
I've made that walk. It's
Yeah.
it's not easy if you're not practiced at
Yeah,
it.
he'd walk and stop, and walk and stop. Somebody would give him a ride. Sometimes there wouldn't be a ride.
Mm-hmm.
But they were throwbacks to the early days. John Bowie went way back. As they say, Charlie came in the 20s probably, but he was a fixture on C Street, and just a very pleasant guy. So I had the joy of living in the past, if I had just paid more attention to folks that were here when mining was still going.
Yeah.
Yeah, not anymore.
Is there a question that comes to mind that you wish you could have asked?
Well, I wish I would have. My dad would do it, because my dad delivered groceries on horseback, for God's sake. He was born in 1910, and he knew where the Cornish people lived, the Irish people. He knew Queenie Capuro. He knew where everybody was, and they all had a history, and all had a story. And he would tell me, and I'd go, "Oh, okay, Dad."
Yeah.
And I didn't write them down, but they were nice stories. He was a nice man and would tell you, oh, he was a hard worker. Oh, he was Crybaby Annie, or Tony, the strongest guy my dad has said he ever saw. So they were just delightful characters that have gotten lost as history's gone.
And I imagine owning a grocery store, you're almost everyone needs groceries, right? Except for maybe the people that just have liquid breakfasts. But you still need your eggs, right?
Yes.
So you interact with almost everyone in town.
I was, that was a blessing I didn't appreciate at the time. And there were 2 other grocery stores also, but the NC Prater had been in that building from about 1915 or 16. And the Prater grocery store is really where the Del Rio is today. That was Warren's hardware store. But yes, I got to see people from the time I was 6 years old. Ronnie, how are you? Fine, Mrs. Cobb, how are you? What can I get for you? That was a neat, and then I got to deliver groceries. Of course, it didn't have to be 16 to drive back then. So I was either with my dad or driving when I was 14. So I got to see more of the town on a regular basis than a lot of my classmates did, just because of the grocery store, and got to know a lot of people personally. They knew Mrs. Cobb, but they didn't give her groceries,
Right.
And didn't deliver groceries, or George Cobb. So anyway, it was a great experience for me, and that's why I have memories that maybe some others wouldn't, because I got to travel all over the town on a regular basis. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday were the delivery days.
Oh, thank you. I love minutia like that, because those don't always make it into the history books.
Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Stuff like that.
And we would put the groceries on the floor, and we would put them by the area that we were going to go to, and we would deliver them in the, various vehicles, but the blue truck for a long, long time. My dad would drive before I drove, and we would go up the street and drop them off at Kate O'Connor's house, or Sadie Smith's house, or Queenie Capuro's house. And in the winter, you'd park down and walk up, because you couldn't get up in those days. Didn't have any of that four-wheel drive stuff. If you couldn't get there with chains, or they hadn't plowed, you delivered it by hand.
Wow.
Walked.
Like, I don't want to get his name wrong, but the guy who would deliver the mail in the snow, Snowshoe Thompson.
Snowshoe Thompson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, another character, speaking of, that I grew up with that, of course, today wouldn't pass muster, but Garbage Mike.
I was hoping you'd talk about Garbage Mike. I like reading about him. What can you tell us about Garbage Mike?
Well, Garbage Mike was just a character, and he lived really in a lean-to down a 6 Mile Canyon, just a little bit north of the hospital. And he collected garbage up here for years. It was $1 a month or something. And he would just throw it over the back of his truck and go down. And of course, the dump is where it is now, but it was an open dump in those days. We didn't haul it away. You just either burned it or plowed it over. But Garbage Mike was a fixture in his truck. Nice guy, always said hello, always had a smile. more than willing to buy somebody a drink. He was just a fascinating personality. Yeah.
I get the sense from what I have read about him is he didn't have much English in his vocabulary. So
No.
a lot of it was pantomiming or,
Yep.
writing.
Yes, yes, yes. And actually, there were any number of people, because of the store. Spanish Joe Casidio, he would come in and say, Ronnie, and he would point to his chest, smokes, smokes. Well, that meant he wanted Prince Albert, a can of Prince Albert.
I love that you still know his order.
Yep. And then he'd say, bacon dozen eggies, Ronnie. And I put those out, wrote us, of course it was credit, and you paid once a month. And yeah, he was quite a character too. Spanish Joe Casidio, garbage. We had a lot of them. You know, just wish I had pictures of them. And some of it did make it in the paper, fortunately, in the 50s, thanks to Beebe and Clegg coming and starting the enterprise. So otherwise, a lot of those stories would be lost. Although there are some interesting, in the 30s, there were several series because there was a little resurgence of mining in the 30s. The Arizona Comstock took over for the Hale and Norcross and all that stuff. I won't burden you with all that, but mining was going to come back. Didn't make it, but it brought in a few new people, and there were some very interesting articles written by a fellow by the name of Nevin, I believe it was, for the Gazette Journal or the Nevada State Journal, whatever. It had several name iterations. But fascinating stories about Virginia City and some of the people, including my Uncle George Wilson. So if you're ever just looking for a time frame to pick up some knowledge, go look in the journal archives in the 30s, because there are many stories about Virginia City.
Oh, thank you. I will. Yeah, I absolutely will. So could you tell us a little bit more about your parents? Who were they? We know that they had a grocery store, but what else did they do? What are some memories you have of them?
Well, on my mom's side, she was a Wilson and grew up here, went to school here. In fact, my dad I think he went 13 years. He got an extra year and they didn't police. He was a good athlete, so he just stayed for an extra year. My mother went to the First Ward School for at least a couple of years. And my mother was probably a mouthy little kid.
What makes you say that?
Well, she had an opinion about everything.
Yeah.
And very smart. And of course, there were very few kids. First Ward closed down in, like you say, probably 2021. But to get her out of there, and I forget who told me the story, they would have her walk the chalk, which meant take some chalk. Genevieve, you're all caught up with your work. Take this a box of chalk and take it up to the Fourth Ward School. And so she would walk from one end of school, one end of town to the other. But walking the chalk was, you weren't in trouble, but it got you out of the way. And then she went the rest of the time here at the Fourth Ward. My dad went all, like you say, 12 years or 13, whatever it was, here. My mother had a sister, Reen Wilson, and of course she went here also, and their dad was the janitor. So both sides of my family, all the Gallaghers and all the Wilsons, went to school here in the 20s and 30s.
Are there any stories that you remember about the Fourth Ward School of your family telling you?
Well, of course, things that kind of get lost. They had a home ec class because right on the other side here, that taught home ec so that girls could find work when they got out of high school because they didn't go on to college. So they had a very elaborate home ec operation. And uh, then I always remember the upstairs, the top floor is unfinished. If you've been up there, that's the one that isn't finished. And that's when you got into high school. It was called the hanky-pank area. If you were going to go fool around or whatever, and you were in high school, juniors and seniors, you got to go up there. None of the younger kids did. So that was always kind of funny. And then there was no gym here, so but very good athletic teams, basketball teams. In fact, Jake Lawler Event Center, he was coach here for several years. My dad played ball with him, didn't play under him, but played ball with him. So I always heard the athletic stories and the Jake Lawler stories, because he was quite a character in many ways. So I heard a lot of that.
Is there one story that you could share with us?
Oh no, just that Jake was a burly guy and liked to have a wee touch or two, well, as did so many people here. And so after school hours could get quite lively in Virginia City, and there were some folks that if you just got bored, you'd have a fight. Jake was kind of one of them. Clint Andreessen. I went to school with Clint's son, Clint Jr. So the 30s were a fascinating time, both from a school endeavor, and maybe the mines were coming back, and they were digging the pit across the way. That's called Loring's Pit. That wasn't a pit until the 1930s. That was just part of the mountain. So yeah, I grew up with so many stories. I'd have to give me a name. I can give you a story probably about it. But
very cool.
Jake's involvement up here prior to the time that he went down to the university, and then, well, made history in terms of coaching all the sports and having the event center named after him. He was here about 4 years, I guess. So yeah, quite a number of stories about Coach Lawler.
And you said your dad played ball?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any stories about his childhood sports career?
Well, the main thing, of course, there was a little bit of football, but it came and it went. And so my dad didn't play football, but he played basketball. Mm-hmm. And there was no gym here. There was the hoop upstairs that you could shoot. But if they wanted to play, they either had to go to Piper's Opera House, and there's a basketball floor on the second, a basketball court on the second floor of the Opera House that most people don't even know about because we've covered it. And yeah, the two hoops and the lines are still there. Wow. If you were to pull up the protective coating. And then they played at what was called the National Guard Armory, which is right above the existing high school, and it's right where the Firehouse Museum is. And that was the main gym that they played in. And that Jake, and they had wonderful town teams up here, not just high school, but town team. And Jake was a very competitive guy, and they had the Lawler play. If someone was scoring a lot of points, and that, if they were playing Carson or they were playing Fallon, each town had Jake would, and they had wooden coal stoves to heat the places upstairs. And so one of the plays was, if somebody was scoring too many points, they would let him, whoever that was for the other side, run down the court, and Jake would run down alongside him and give him the Lawler elbow, and right in front of the stove. And of course the only alternative that the guy had was to throw out his hands, and he burned his hands so he couldn't shoot as well afterwards. So that's
Is that legal?
It was then.
It was then, okay.
Because nobody was going to argue with Jake.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Neat stories.
So where did you go to school?
I went all 12 years right here. In the new school, of course, not new anymore. But I went pretty much with probably of the 10 or 12 that graduated, 8 or 9 of us spent 12 years together. First and second, third and fourth, or first and second, third and fourth. There were 2 classes in each room. and the teacher would teach first and second grade. Mrs. Lynch, I still remember. Mrs. Hanson taught third and fourth. Mrs. Smith, fifth and sixth. Mrs. Schooley, seventh and eighth.
Keep going. This is good. This is good information. I love this minutia.
And you just moved one room to the next room after 2 years.
Yeah.
It was, did your multiplication tables, learned how to spell. Yeah, it was a good education.
So of your class, who were some of the people you went to school with in your class?
Well, in fact, you're going to interview Kathy Odinsky, Kathy Leonard. Well, Jim Leonard and I went 12 years together. Leroy Goodman, his dad had the service station where the Bonanza bar is now, 12 years there. Oberster's, 12 years. Andreessen's, 12 years. Bobby Dufresne, probably 10 years. Those were just families that you grew up with that were part of, part of the 1800s. And we ended up spending 12 years together and back in those days, everybody didn't have a car, so I used to laugh and say, they said, well, what did you do growing up? And I said, well, we shot things. And people would look at me and I said, no, we 22s and hunted, but we also shot hoops because we would go down to the gym and you get the key from my uncle and whoever got the key, turned the lights on, and pretty soon there'd be 3 or 4 there, and that's how we spent our time. Didn't get in a lot of trouble in the gym.
How about outside of the gym?
Tried, but of course, in those days you walked.
Mm-hmm.
School started at 9. It ended at noon for lunch break. It was out for an hour, and you went home for lunch, or uptown, and some people would walk up to the store and get a tomato or whatever, and then at 1 o'clock you'd go back to school. And that was a typical day, September through June. Yeah. So anyway, I look at the pictures, and many of us, Joanne Elkin just lived down the street, Elaine Ross, all names that we had 12 years together.
Who was your best friend growing up?
Oh gosh, probably Jim Leonard was as good a friend as any. Used to come up to the house, and we used to go up to his house. And in fact, the Leonard house is it's just down from where you're staying. That was the Leonard house, just to south, or just north. And but it was a fairly close knit. Whoever you ended up walking around with, or if I had my 22 and was walking down to go down the canyon or whatever, if somebody else walked out, you just go walk together. You certainly knew everybody.
That probably made it hard to get into trouble, or very easy to get caught. I don't know.
Well, it could go either way. As long as everybody was quiet and didn't talk, you were all right. If somebody opened their mouth, though, you could get in a lot of trouble in a hurry.
Yeah, I bet
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah.
I bet it travels quick.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
What were some of the things that you guys would hunt or shoot at?
Well, yeah. Of course, today people are more sensitive, and it was a different time.
It's a different time.
Shot anything that moved. The squirrels that were running around down at the dump. You had your single shot, 22. You hunted doves the 1st of September. The dove season opened. Duck season opened in October. Deer season opened in October, and that's what you looked forward to hunting. And I was joking with somebody one day that we were talking about all the bottles we shot. And I said, we probably shot up $1 million worth of collectible bottles because we'd have a big rainstorm and people would just throw the bottles out behind their house, and there was a dump, and they would get uncovered. And so you take the bottle and put it up on the edge of the rock or whatever and say, well, I'll see if I can take the top off it. Well, it was probably worth $1,000. We didn't know
today.
at the time. Yeah. So I said, There's a couple of $1 million worth of glass out there that we were all responsible for destroying.
Yeah, those bottle hunters are hearing this and they're clutching their heart. They're having a heart attack,
Oh my
I'm
God,
sure.
yes.
Yeah, you hear stories about things that after the rain or what have you will basically, rise to the surface, or history basically comes up. Oyster shells, things
Oyster
like
shells.
that. Are there any other things that
By
come
the
to mind?
jillions. Well, the oyster shells, we didn't think anything of, but there were oyster shells everywhere. And I remember the story that somebody had told me about oysters, and when the wealthier people, and the town was getting wealthy, and they came from all over the country, they liked their oysters and champagne. The miners, the Cornish and the Irish and the Germans and whatever, because they came from all over the country, they liked their whiskey or their beer. But if all those richer people were eating those oysters, and drinking champagne, well, we can have that too. So they would go order oysters, or to even take oysters home, because they were as good as the wealthy people, and that's why they're scattered all over the town.
Oh wow, so they're not just relegated to one district or
it
one...
was, by God, if they can do it, we can do it. The first, after the fire of '75, and they rebuilt the International Hotel, before they had opened the hotel, they had the businesses on the ground floor, and they called them chop houses, and served meat and oysters. And the first day they were open, they sold 2,000 oysters.
Wow.
That's a lot of oysters to bring into Virginia City from somewhere.
Right, it has to be shipped in.
Oh, yes.
I imagine maybe on ice and sawdust or
Ice
something
and sawdust,
like that,
exactly, yes, ice and sawdust. Some from as far away as the East Coast, not all from the West Coast. So, yeah.
Some good
2,000 oysters.
Some good eating here.
Actually, very good.
Then and now.
Then and now.
Are there any restaurants that come to mind?
Well, of course, the Del Rio, now, we could stand more restaurants here.
Yeah.
Gold Hill Hotel was a great job. Cider Factory. That's a battle now we need more, we'd love to keep people overnight. Well, okay, we've got some places to stay, but most of the town is, and you're up here, closes down. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a couple of more good restaurants? Well, we can't open a good restaurant unless we're going to have enough people. Now, maybe we need some more room. So this is a conflict that's been going on forever, since the tourism industry exploded, not so many years ago, but we need places to stay and we need places to eat, and which comes first? I don't know.
Yeah. A couple restaurants that seem to do really well because people still talk about them today, like the Sharon House, for example. Did you ever get to eat at any of those?
Well, the Sharon House, and I was married before my lovely Judy, and Cordelia, her dad, by the way, was the editor of Bob Richards was the editor of the Territorial Enterprise.
I love Bob Richards. So did you ever, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go ahead, continue about the Sharon House.
No,
We'll circle back to
so
Mr.
the Sharon
Richards.
House, she actually worked over there for a summer after I taught school in Vegas, and the Sharon House was just at Linleong, stunning location. The food was great. People came from all over, and then they began to enact the DUI laws in the 60s, and you could get in a lot of trouble. Not a wreck, but you could get stopped. And so, kind of a combination of things, the Sharon House came and went, but it was a marvelous restaurant, marvelous location. Yeah. And Lynn, and they played poker up there at night. Tiny Carlson, who ran the Silver Queen, it was Molinelli. There were just a few regulars that hung out with Lynn most nights and played cards, and he was a fantastic cook.
And then Cook makes me think of Merle Cook. Did you ever go to the Silver Stoke when it was a jazz club?
Many times. And Merle, of course, attended bar at the Sharon House.
Okay.
And then he the Silver Stope, before Merle went in and kind of redid it, there used to be in the back, God, it's a wonder we didn't die because there was no ventilation. They had steaks and they would barbecue the steaks and the smoke would, and the bar was out in the front. Merle came in and put his piano bar, and you walk in the door, the piano bar was off to the left, and then he had Turk Murphy, he had musicians from all over the country come up. And big, tiny, little, like, I can't remember them all, but Merle was a wonderful talent and a very nice man, I might add. He was just a delight.
You'd still hear people talk about those steaks.
Yes.
They say that they were just the best steaks that they
Yep.
ever had.
Yep. Yep.
And the Comstock house, I heard a story recently about Lucius Beebe would go in there and he'd bring his dog, Towser. Towser was his actual name, but he got the nickname T-Bone.
T-Bone.
I heard in the Comstock house they'd ordered a T-bone steak for the dog.
They went there, and they also, Beebe and Clegg were great patrons of the Delta.
Yes.
And of course, before Angelo took over and reconfigured it, but the Delta was much smaller than it is now. There was a sawdust corner right on the corner where you go up the stairs. Shorty Harper ran that for years. And then there was another little restaurant that was probably 15 to 20 feet wide and 40 feet deep that the Bogles ran. And then there was 4-Day Jack's restaurant, which was part of the Delta for many, many years. And then the Delta Bar itself, and Ragtime Bob Benarsh used to play. Delightful guy.
What was it like watching Mr. Darch play?
It was a show.
Yeah.
He used to get that stool cocked, and he'd be playing and stomping his foot, and music was marvelous, and the Bromans were there, and of course he was the artist at the time. Beebe and Clegg were there. My folks were there. You know, there were old timers that were there, and there was something going on. There was what I want to say, the vaudeville down next to the Silver Queen. Today, I think Connie has a little photo shop there, or a dress shop, and they actually had little vaudeville productions in there. So there were a lot of things going on in the 50s before Bonanza that still kept the town going, and it's just the Sharon House. And of course, we went through the period down with the Comstock House, which was an interesting period of time, bringing the drug culture to Virginia City. 50s were, interesting time.
Well, you brought up the B word. Are you ready to talk about Bonanza and how life changed after that aired?
Yes, and I've mellowed. Bonanza, to an old native, for Virginia City today was a blessing and a curse. It certainly was a blessing because it put Virginia City on the map.
Literally, it's the introduction. There's Virginia
Yes.
City right there, right?
And I've talked to people, still, we're here at the school, the Chinese people, my God, they can tell you chapter and verse about Bonanza. They still watch it. The German people are particularly tuned in to Bonanza. But Bonanza put Virginia City on the map as a tourism attraction. But it went a long way toward destroying the true heritage, which is not cowboy. Cowboys love cowboys, vaqueros, buckaroos, but they weren't here. They were down in Dayton, and they were in Carterville, and they were out in Battle Mountain and various places. There was actually because Bonanza, I think, came in 58 or 59, and by 60, 61, we could start to see. And Angelo, for example, he realized the potential, and that's why you have the Bonanza Casino that he put down there, and that was a service station that the Goodmans had for years. And there was a commissioners meeting, and we used to have, rambling on here, but the Delta lot, they used to have mucking contests. They used to have the traditional race up to the top of Mount Davidson and back, up to the V and back if you didn't want to do the whole thing. That was all part of the physicality of the miners, and I remember those things. They were still going on. But I think it was in '62 they actually had a commissioners meeting. And the discussion was, what are we going to do about our heritage? Are we going to give up our mining heritage and fully embrace the Bonanza heritage? And the answer was yes, they embraced the Bonanza heritage. Although we make every effort through the Tourism Commission or whatever to still keep the mining alive, and mining conventions up here and so on. But so that was a long way to say we're where we are today with the tourism industry because of Bonanza.
Yeah, you still hear about Bonanza today when you walk up and down the boardwalk. There's still references all over to it.
And you know, it's okay. The only thing that, and I'm getting older, so I have to be a little less confrontational, but I have heard people dressed up, oh, this was the wildest west town that you ever saw. There were cowboys on every corner, and there weren't. If you look at the pictures of the time, you don't see a cowboy. You see a lot of people like my uncle with a tie on and a hat and a horse. But anything that resembled the mystical cowboy world that we've grown up with, the wild, wild west, wasn't here. And so I've actually stopped and said, you know, if I could interrupt you folks, that really isn't true. Made myself popular, of course.
I'm sure.
But the groups now that and they don't dress as cowboys, but was it the 601 Society? They really do a fine job telling the history of Virginia City, and people love the gunfights, and I just accept that as Disneyland, but it's okay because the kids love it and they stay in town and they spend some money, as long as you don't fabricate the history of what Virginia City was. So Joe Curtis and I are historic fanatics, and so we correct. And there isn't as much need, by the way. There is, I think, much less of telling the wrong history. And people come expecting to see cowboys. So, okay, all right, okay.
I'm surprised we've talked this long and Joe Curtis's name only just came up. Would you like to, for those that don't know Mr. Curtis or would like to learn more, would you like to share?
Well, Joe Curtis is a resource.
Yes.
And I really am fortunate because occasionally he lets me be his color commentator. In fact, we're doing, and it irritates me no end that I didn't think of this, but Joe and I are doing a couple of deals down at the Gold Hill Hotel. Joe doing most of it, like I said, I'm the color commentator. And what he has done is said, how did we get from the greatest industrial mining center in the world, peaks and valleys, into the 30s, mining's coming back, and then all of a sudden, mining is gone, and we come into town today, and we've got thousands of people here every day. How did the town survive when mining was dying and tourism really hadn't been born? So he's taking his wonderful picture collection, and he will be picking the pictures, but because I was here for part of that time, I get to ramble on about some of the buildings and whatever. But he is a treasure. He's a very underappreciated treasure who does so many things for the town and things that people don't even know about, and is a true historian. So, yeah.
Did you ever get to meet his stepfather, Graham Hardy?
Probably. I met his mother. In fact, Joe and I laugh because my mother, born in 1913, she was throwing things out. Oh, God, that's old. And that included pitcher and vase sets, clocks. Get rid of that lovely hardwood table. Let's get a Formica one in here. And his mother is picking up the tables my mother is throwing out.
Yeah.
And neither one, I mean, Joe's mother, my God, thank God she saved that stuff. My mother, it was just old. We're probably throwing things out today that 20, 30 years from now we should have kept.
I think about that. It's a fine line between being a historian and a hoarder.
Yes, yes it is. Exactly right. And of course, Joe, his collection of photographs and stuff down in his resource lab, I call it. It's just amazing, and it's thank God she saved all that stuff, and Graham did too. Yeah, and then Joe has continued that tradition, and he probably has the finest collection, an organized collection of photographs relative to Virginia City, even better than the university. They may have more, but you can't find them, where Joe can say, well, let's go, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. Yeah, I just love, and I get to talk with him every now and then, so yeah, it's fun. But he is putting the story together as to how we have arrived in 2022 as a tourism attraction known quite literally all over the world that used to be the greatest industrial mining center in the world. So it was an interesting, and I wish I had thought about putting something, and he did, putting it together, how we transitioned. The Charlie Addises were still here, and then they died off, and then new people came in, and today we have a tourism town.
And his parents played a role in the tourism and telling the story of Virginia history, Virginia City history with their museum. Did you ever go to their museum?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yes, and Joe's book collection.
Yes, and then the bookstore. Yes.
The bookstore, and he had them all indexed. And in fact, I found pictures when I was, I've done quite a little bit of research relative to the Gallagher in particular, and the Wilson, although there's more for the Gallaghers, the family tree stuff. And I found pictures that Joe had that just added to my family collection. So yeah, he and Ellie, Saint Ellie. I always kid Ellie, kid Joe, I said, she has to be a saint to have been with you for 57 years now, I think it is.
When I talked to Joe Curtis, he said he had 1 hour. And I said, oh, great, I love it, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man, I'd love to talk to you for an hour. We talked for 3, because it just, once you get on it.
And Joe has an unlimited, and particularly if we can bring up pictures, oh, it's fascinating.
That's what I think took up our time. He pulled out his territorial enterprises,
oh, God,
and he cracked it open. He said here and here, and
yeah.
you know, he had props.
In fact, I have just, if you ever want to look through them, you're certainly welcome, because my ex-wife, Cordelia, her dad was the enterprise. I have the bound copies of 54, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so if you ever want to just take them and go through them, more than
that would be.
They're fascinating, and Bob writes his column in there when he used to put the paper to bed Thursday morning, and then he started his rounds, which meant that he drank Thursday, Friday, Saturday, would come home late Saturday, get up Sunday, put his notes together, put the paper together during Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He was a very, very interesting man, and some of the material he's got in there is fascinating.
He is so funny to read. I mean, here we are even 60 years later reading the stuff that he wrote, and it is timeless. He's talking about things that happened 60 years ago, or even farther. You know,
oh yeah,
1800,
yeah.
You know, he was quite a historian himself, especially for not being a native. He was only here maybe 20 years, give or take, early mid-50s.
Cordelia came here when she was probably in the 6th, 7th grade, 8th grade, which would have put it, the early 50s. And then Bob died on the floor of the Territorial Enterprise building. In fact, was going to graduate school, and we were staying up there, and they called and said Bob's had a heart attack, and we went down and tried to work on him, and took him. He was dead when he hit the floor. But what a fitting place, anyway.
I think
to die.
He would have wanted it that way. He was so dedicated to that paper. I worked for a newspaper, a weekly paper, very irreverent, similar tone to the Enterprise, so I can project how I feel onto this from a personal place. But to see that he, uprooted his family, moved here because he was reading the territorial Enterprise of the era and was just like, I gotta be here. Then that's a dedication in and of itself. But then to leave after sort of a falling out with the newer owners.
Yes, and started his own for a short period of time.
Starting his own paper,
yep.
Which I'd love to talk about if you can recall, Bob Richards' Chronicle at all. And because it was only out for about 8 months, but
I think I may have that bound too.
Oh, what a treasure that is!
And then he worked in Vegas.
But he came back, right?
Yes.
So, and then to come back and then to run it himself again,
mm-hmm.
and just shows the dedication of this.
He was a fascinating guy. He was an original Eclampus Vitus. He was in Eclampus Vitus when it was in California, and it was as I understand it, it was a drinking man's intellectual club. Now it has changed a bit, although they do some very good work. But when he used to tell the stories, and then they would actually meet up in the pit, up Sutton Street, pit's still there, the old Ophir pit. Bob was a true clamper, and then clampers kind of brought in new people and did some new things and weren't quite as intellectually anxious as the original ones were. They became more of a drinking club, I guess, than anything. But Bob was an original clamper.
Yeah, when you look at the plaque, it's got his name, for the founding of the Julia Bulette chapter, right?
Yes.
It's got his name. I think I could be wrong here, but I think Tiny Carlson's name's on there as well.
Tiny Louis Beaupre, maybe. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. Do you remember when the Clampers were reformed or formed here in the early 60s?
Not really. I remember the Clampers, and I remember Bob telling the story. And then the Clampers, then they got the initiation was to take somebody's clothes off and make them walk in from Julia Bullette's grave, and I think Bob just used to shake his head because they dressed in red and put the hat on and took pride in doing good deeds. And of course there are chapters all over California. If you go down to Placerville and whatever, they're clampers. And they're doing some very good work now, cemetery work in particular. I don't know, let's see, Gibsonville, that area up out of Grayville. That's where part of my family came from, Halfies. And they have done some work up in that cemetery that's wonderful. And it's one that people don't know is there, so it hasn't been vandalized like our cemetery was, where they walked out with all kinds of stuff. But do some very, very nice work. And then go have a wee touch or two afterwards, which is fine.
A reward for, a job well done.
Yes, that's exactly right. Might have one at noon, too.
Yeah. Well, you got to start the day off.
Yes, you do.
Going back to Bob Richards just for a moment here, he is credited with starting the camel races in 1960. Mm-hmm. Well, planting the seeds for them a little before the first one happened. Do you remember the first camel races?
I was standing where the parking lot is now. The Reen Benner, which is my mother's sister, she lived in the corner house. And then the next three down were my folks, part of the Wilson. And one of those houses is the one out at the cemetery now. And then the other two were moved. But anyway, yes, Bob did it on a Mark Twain type thing, threw it out, and all of a sudden it kind of stuck. I stood on the porch of that house, Rena Delbert's house, in 1960, when the first camels ran up B Street. That's where the first camel race was.
Well, thank you for settling that, because I've heard many different people say the first one was C Street, some say D Street.
To the best of my recollection,
yes.
And they actually kept the camels, and I know it was 60 because I had come back from Santa Clara and we still had horses, and that was the last summer we had the horse up here. So I was riding the horse one day after work, or maybe it was on the weekend. They kept the camels. I think they had 2, maybe 3. Well, what's in there now? It's Yandre and Tig had a little place next to the water. I talk Comstockese, next to the water house, right on the corner of Taylor, and that's where they kept the camels. And I was riding the horse up in front of the courthouse, and the guy is bringing the camel down for exercise. Well, he thought it'd be, and I didn't realize that horses do not like camels.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, they were prohibited from being on the street in Gold Hill until after 6 o'clock because they scared, in the 1870s when they tried camels up here, and they didn't work for a variety of reasons. The guy is walking down, and all of a sudden he lets the camel lunge toward the horse. And I was younger then, and as the horse spun around and I spun around, I stayed in the saddle, said something rotten both to the camel and to the jockey, and realized that, yes, horses do not like them. But that's what locks in the 1960, because that was the first year, and I think they started them down past the Opera House and ran them up the street. And I can't remember if they had 1 or 2 races. And then after that, they moved down to D Street. They moved down to where the Railroad Museum is, and kind of looked for home and looked for somebody to keep doing it because it was a volunteer effort. And they became quite rowdy at one time too. The camel races were, whoa, holy smokes, did you even want to be up in Virginia City? But now they're a tradition and an institution and bring a lot of people in.
Yeah, it's amazing that it started from almost a joke.
Yes.
Or it is a joke.
It was a joke.
And then grow into what it is today, which is, it's a full-on, tradition and spectacle.
Yes.
With multiple animals and
the ostriches now,
yes.
and the races, and then that has sort of gone and helped facilitate having an actual rodeo, which also brings particularly Hispanic population. It's all helping Virginia City in its new role as a tourist mecca.
It's certainly lured me away from my home in Southern California to come up and
you got lucky and
go.
Came up to God's country.
Exactly. Right. Yes, exactly. And so again, I can't believe we've been talking this long, and we're only now just talking. You only now just brought up Mark Twain. Is there anything about Mark Twain that you'd like to sort of enlighten us about his time here, or maybe some myths or misconceptions?
Well, no, only that, of course, he has a stamp on the Comstock, and he really wasn't here. He was here twice. But, for a couple of years, and how many stories are true about him and not true and walking down to Gold Hill, I don't know. But we have been to his house back in Connecticut.
Oh.
And it's just a marvelous link for Virginia City to have. And he did not hurt Virginia City in the things that he wrote. And people associate Mark Twain, Sam Clemens with Virginia City, and that's good. But no, I wish I knew some secret tidbits, but I don't.
But you can tell us about, as someone who's grown up in Virginia City, how you feel about Mark Twain being associated. So that's very helpful, because I know some people have complained about being Mark Twained to death.
Oh.
But
he was a piece of Comstock history, and that's just a fact.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about somebody that got blown out of proportion, take Julia Bellette.
Yes.
Holy criminy. Most celebrated courtesan of the Comstock, and they put the when they realized that she had gotten some publicity, and I don't know whether it was the Sky Deck, and the Sky Deck now, you wouldn't recognize it, but it's right across the street from the Bucket of Blood. And both of them put out the telescope, and I think it was Marshall McBride's dad, painted the white fence and said, "That's Julia Bullett's grave." And all of a sudden, she gained immense notoriety, and she actually did have a house right below the Bucket of Blood, but she was not the most celebrated courtesan of the Comstock, but she's got a reputation, and she's now part of the folklore, and as long as you keep it in perspective, hey, okay. It's another side of Virginia City that was a reality, and okay, she's just like Mark Twain, and probably gets more than her just due for the amount of time she was here, but she's become part of the legend. Okay.
Yeah, that answers my question about, did people really talk about Julia Bulett pre-tourism era? Yeah.
No, in fact, it's funny because my folks had the grocery store, and my uncle had it before, and I don't know that we ever talked much about Julia Bulett, or she even came up. But then around the time that they realized Bonanza and people were coming in, and if you want to get my mother's attention, it would be when people came in from California or from wherever, and they would say, we need to get a loaf of bread and whatever, and can you tell us how to get to Boot Hill? And then they would also ask about, well, what about this Julia Bulett? My mother being a purist now and a native. It's a wonder she didn't put something in their bread. There's no Boot Hill here. There is no such thing as Boot Hill. And Julia Bulett, I don't know. She just somebody didn't talk about her. So anyway.
So I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and we could do this for hours. But like you said, the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure, yeah. And I'm sure everyone here watching has enjoyed the last hour and a half, if you can believe it's already been an hour and a half. But we do have a few more minutes left. If there was anything that we didn't talk about or cover that you feel is important to your story, Virginia City's story.
No, Virginia City is, I can go back to Speed Hesse and whatever, and I can come through and see the Virginia City of today. The stores, the number of people that when I was a kid, if the tourists did come, the town opened on Memorial Day and it closed on Labor Day, and now it's really 12 months a year. And Joe and I laugh about the fact that instead of having to go underground to get gold and silver, now we just mine it out of the tourist pockets. And it's a whole different Virginia City, but we are the buildings, and not everybody, but those that are interested in their buildings and do a little historic research, it's just a neat place to be from.
Well said. Couldn't have put it any better. So thank you so much, Ron. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate
doing
you
this for the Fourth Ward School. And
my pleasure.
Thank you.